Welcome to the third installment of Don't Take This as Gospel. We are currently going through Dennis Prager's commentary on the Old Testament book of Exodus. Exodus, God, Slavery, and Freedom. Head over to Amazon and pick yourself up a copy. I have a link to it in the video description. So let's get to the end of Exodus chapter 1. Exodus chapter 1, there is a point of contention between Dennis Prager and I on this particular moral subject we're going to cover today. And the subject is, does God approve of lying? Dennis's argument is yes, and he's arguing from the end of Exodus chapter 1. So what happened in Exodus chapter 1? Well, one of the things that happened, we covered this a little in the last video, was that the midwives of Egypt were told by Pharaoh that the Hebrews had grown too numerous in the land, and he wanted to basically start committing some, at least, minimization, if not outright genocide, of the Israelite race. And so he told them, I want you to check when the baby is born, and if it's a male, kill it. Well, they refused to do that because they feared God more than they feared Pharaoh. They knew that God would punish them, and they didn't want to be punished by the Lord of all the universe. They were willing to risk being punished by the Lord of Egypt. Now, they also, and it comes down to this end of the chapter here, they also lied to Pharaoh when they were confronted about the fact that they had not obeyed his orders. So, what did they say? They didn't say the truth, because the truth was that they feared God. They feared God more than they feared Pharaoh. They didn't say that. What they said was, well, you know, these Hebrew women, man, they are just sturdy and vigorous. I mean, they're like, they're like animals as far as their constitution goes, and they just give birth all by themselves. We by the time we get there, they've already had the kid. Oh, they're powerhouses. It's actually meant in sort of a kind of a derogatory term. They're kind of like beasts, in that sense, and that's what Dennis Prager actually makes reference to here when he says, Ilana Pardis, professor of comparative literature at the Hebrew University, noted the words translated here also mean they're animals. So it makes it kind of a derogatory sort of, it's not, they're not like our hybrid, highbrow Egyptian women who, need to be attended upon in order to give birth. These people are just like beasts of the field. They just plop a kid out. So, that being said, Pharaoh bought the lie and said, okay, well, my plan's not going to work, so I'm going to have to think of something else. And it says in the next verse that because the midwives feared God, he established households for them. God dealt well with the midwives. Now, Dennis Prager's argument here is that God approved of absolutely everything that the midwives did in this case. He approved of their, number one, not killing the male Israelite children, and number two, lying to Pharaoh. Now, you can see how the Israelites definitely benefited from their lie, even though, if you look at it on the surface, it was a self-serving lie. They were trying to get out of the fact that, we fear God more than we fear you. I mean, no Pharaoh is going to want to be told that. So they had to come up with something. And so to protect themselves, they said, well, these Hebrew women, I mean, man, they're just like beasts of the field. They plop out a kid and hey, they're good to go. They don't even need us. And that had the secondary effect of convincing Pharaoh that he needed a different plan. So it was a good effect, but does that mean that God approved of the lying? Now, Dennis Prager would say yes, but does the scripture actually say this? And I'm using the verses here that Dennis Prager chose for the translation, and I'm going to read them here. So the king of Egypt, that's Pharaoh, summoned the midwives and said to them, why have you done this thing, letting the boys live? The midwives said to Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not like Egyptian women. They're vigorous. That's the phrase that could also be translated like, they're animals. Before the midwife can come to them, they've given birth. And then it says, and God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and increased greatly. And because the midwives feared God, he established households for them. Now, why does it say, for what reason does it say that God dealt well with the midwives and that God established households for them? It never says because they lied. It says because they feared God. It specifically refers to that. It specifically refers to the fact that they did not kill the Israelites' male children at birth because they feared God. That's not the same thing as saying, well, because they feared God and then lied. Because it doesn't say in the line about lying to Pharaoh that they lied to Pharaoh because they feared God. It only says that the midwives, fearing God, did not do as the king of Egypt had told them. They let the boys live. So, when God rewarded them, the only thing that we really know that God rewarded them for was disobeying the king. But it doesn't actually say that God rewarded them for lying to the king. So is lying moral or not? Well, that's a very, large and thorny question, because there's obvious examples where it looks like telling the truth would end up resulting in a moral absurdity. The common example is, your Nazis are knocking on your door looking for Jews during the Holocaust. You tell them that you have some hidden in the attic. That's not a question I want to get into right now, and the main reason for that is that the commandment against bearing false witness, which is where we generally get our prohibition against lying, it does not arrive in the book of Exodus until chapter 20. So I want to make sure that I give Dennis Prager enough time to explain his views in full to me before I try addressing the overall larger context issue of whether God ever thinks lying is right. But in the sole context of this particular thing, of Exodus 1, did God really approve of the lying that took place by the midwives? Now, he might have, but it doesn't say that specifically. It specifically says that God approved of the fact that the midwives feared him. And that's why he rewarded them. That's all it says. Now, you can read more into that, and obviously Dennis Prager does. But I also want to make note of the fact that there is a New Testament example of this as well. And it occurs in the book of James. That's one of the apostolic writings. And in James chapter 2, James mentions God's praise of Rahab. Rahab was a prostitute who, in the book of Joshua, which is not going to be covered by Dennis Prager because he's only covering the first 5 books of the Old Testament. Joshua is the 6th book of the Old Testament. In Joshua, who has taken over from Moses, has the job of actually conquering the land of Israel. And one of the things that he does is send spies into the land of Israel. And those spies end up at the house of Rahab the prostitute. So I'm going to read from Joshua chapter 2, where it says, Joshua secretly sent 2 spies to Jericho. They went and entered the house of a prostitute named Rahab and stayed there. The king of Jericho sent to Rahab, Bring out the men who came to you. But the woman said, They left. I don't know which way they went. Go quickly, you may catch up with them. But she had hidden them. As soon as the pursuers had gone out, she went up on the roof and said to the spies, Go to the hills, so the pursuers will not find you. Okay, so Rahab did 3 things here. And I want to count them off. The first thing that she did was she allowed the spies to stay at her house. That's number 1. The second thing is, when the king sent for those spies, Rahab said, I don't know, they're not here anymore. They left. They're gone. You may catch up with them. She lied. That's number 2. Number 3 was she sent the spies out in a different way so that the pursuers would not find them. So 3 things she did. Now, in James chapter 2, there is a section of praise for Rahab. she is counted as an example of faith. And actually, her lineage actually went on to produce David, who would become the king of Israel. So she's a very famous figure, and she's considered a righteous figure. Why is she considered a righteous figure? Is it because of all three of those things? Well, let's see what the New Testament says. This is from James chapter 2. You see that a person is considered righteous by what they do, and not by faith alone. Was not even Rahab the prostitute considered righteous for what she did, when she gave lodging to the spies and sent them off in another direction? Where's the approval of lying? It's not there. It's not there. Just as the Old Testament at the end of Exodus praises the midwives, not for lying, but for fearing God and not killing the Israelite children, here, Rahab, who also lied, is not praised for lying. She's praised for everything but the lies. Isn't that interesting? So, does God approve of lying? I would say that's still highly in question, but I'm not going to try and render any verdict until I've gotten to chapter 20 in the Rational Bible, which will cover Exodus 20, that has the 10 Commandments and the passage about don't bear a false witness. So I want to give Dennis Prager the chance to, respond from his own book to that, and I won't cover the larger issue of does God ever approve lying. But I will say that the two instances of lying that might be thought to be approved by God are actually not explicitly. So you got to be careful and think about it. And of course, don't take this as gospel. So, be back for the next installment. I'm excited to find out what happens in chapter 2. Or, if I don't find anything, I'm going through the book and just basically going through and finding things that I think are interesting and I think need to be elaborated on more. And, your mileage may vary. If you want to read the whole book, again, there's a link provided in the video description, and I encourage you to go pick up a copy. This is Mike Partika for Don't Take This as Gospel, and I will see you later.